Okay, so we're diving into a mountain of cybersecurity docs today. You guys send over guides, requirements, even some security awareness briefings.
Yeah. Looks like someone is serious about shoring up their digital defenses.
Seriously, it's like prepping for a digital apocalypse. But hey, I'm here for it. Let's do this deep dive.
You got it. And it's a good thing, too, because, these sources don't sugarcoat it.
Oh, really?
Not at all. They point out that cybercrime is, well, it's becoming more common, way more common, and the tactics, they're evolving constantly. Like, it's getting harder and harder to stay ahead of the bad guys.
So no more leaving our digital doors wide open then.
Right. And that's where cyber essentials comes in. This term, it's everywhere in these documents. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, definitely. It's like the cybersecurity buzzword of the day.
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean? Like, give me the elevator pitch.
It's basically the cybersecurity equivalent of, like, locking your doors and windows. It's the minimum, the absolute minimum you should be doing to protect yourself. It's like cybersecurity 101.
Okay, so it's like the foundation,
Mm.
right? But why essentials? Is it really enough to make a difference against, real threats?
It really is. See, Cyber Essentials is all about practicality. It's about defending against the most common types of cyber attacks, the things that trip most people up.
So like what? Give me some examples.
Think phishing emails, those sneaky malware infections, and of course those oh-so-common password breaches.
Okay, yeah, those are like the classic cyber attacks, the ones you hear about all the time.
Exactly, and they still work. These sources say they account for a huge chunk of successful attacks.
So it's about blocking the easiest routes in.
That's it. Cut off those low-hanging fruit for the cyber criminals, make them work harder.
Love that.
Yeah.
So cyber essentials, it's like the baseline, but is it actually important in the, business world? Or is it more of a nice to have?
Oh, it's becoming essential. Like,
Yeah.
literally, a lot of public sector contracts, they require it now. And it can even open up opportunities for funding. It's kind of a big deal.
Okay, so it's good for security and good for business. Got it.
Yeah.
But let's get down to brass tacks here. Where do we even start? These requirements, they seem pretty specific.
You're right, it can feel overwhelming. But these documents, they actually lay out a pretty good roadmap.
Okay, so we've got a map. That's good. But what about those common pitfalls? The things that trip people up even when they're trying to do the right thing?
Oh, yeah, there are a few. One big one is keeping up with security updates. I know, sounds super basic.
Yeah.
But you would not believe how many organizations just drop the ball on this.
Really?
It's crazy. And this Cyber Essentials document, the one on IT infrastructure, it's very clear. Any software update, any update that fixes a critical vulnerability needs to be applied ASAP, within 14 days max.
So 2 weeks to patch those holes.
Okay.
I got it. Is there anything else that tends to be a problem?
Software support, it's a biggie. Organizations running outdated operating systems, apps that aren't supported anymore.
Oh, yeah. Outdated software. That's scary.
It is, because it means no more security updates, which is like,
Leaving the door wide open.
exactly.
Okay. So keep things updated. Got it. What about administrative accounts? Any golden rules there?
This user access control section in the Cyber Essentials document, it's very clear. Don't use the same account for, admin stuff like installing software as you do for everyday things, like checking email, browsing the web. Bad idea.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So separate accounts for separate tasks. Check. What about personal devices? Like if I check my work email on my phone, does that mean my phone has to be, Cyber Essentials compliant too?
Bingo. You got it. This is where things get a little tricky, and this Trustees Guide to Cyber Essentials really highlights the challenges, especially when you're talking about trustee or volunteer devices. Basically, if a device is used for work at all, even just occasionally, it falls under the umbrella of Cyber Essentials.
Wow, okay. So even my phone needs to be secure. That seems intense.
It really emphasizes, I think, the need for strong security measures across the board. We're talking strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, making sure devices are configured properly.
Okay, starting to see how important this is. Now, speaking of important, this document on supply chain security has me a little freaked out, to be honest. It talks about some pretty scary real-world cyber attacks, like that MOD data breach. What happened there?
That's a perfect example of how even with good internal cybersecurity, things can still go wrong. The MOD, they got hit with a major data breach because, get this, a contractor, someone who handled payroll, they were compromised.
So wait, even if an organization is doing everything right, a supplier messing up can be their downfall.
Exactly, and that's a critical point. Cybersecurity is a team effort. It's not enough to just focus on your own organization's defenses. You have to look at the security practices of your suppliers, your contractors, anyone who has access to your data or systems, really.
Okay, so trust but verify.
Exactly. Remember that massive SolarWinds attack?
Vaguely. Refresh my memory.
It was a huge deal. They exploited a vulnerability in, get this, widely used software. The impact was crazy. It hit tons of organizations, including some big government agencies.
Wow, okay, point taken.
Yeah.
So we've got to be careful who we trust, and we also have to verify that trust constantly.
You got it. This document actually points to some great guidance from the National Cybersecurity Center. It's about understanding the risks and taking steps to mitigate them.
Speaking of mitigating risks, let's talk about malware attacks. This briefing, let me tell you, it's giving me chills. Ransomware, spyware, even cryptojacking. It's like a minefield out there. Seriously, where do we even begin to protect ourselves from all of that? It feels like we're playing defense against an invisible army.
It can definitely feel that way. But hey, remember what they say, knowledge is power.
True, true. So how do we arm ourselves against these digital threats?
Well, the good news is these sources, they lay out some really effective strategies for fighting back. First up, anti-malware software. It's like digital hygiene 101.
Okay, anti-malware, check. But what should we be looking for in a good one?
Always go with a reputable vendor, someone you've heard of, make sure it's kept up to date, and configure it to actively block malware, like before it can even try to run.
Got it. So it's not just install it and forget it. We've got to keep it active, keep it updated.
Exactly. Think of it like a guard dog. You got to keep it fed, keep it trained so it can protect the house.
Love that analogy. Okay, what else? What other tricks do we have up our sleeves?
This one is interesting. It's called application allow listing.
Allow listing. Okay, I like the sound of that already.
So basically, you create a list, right, of trusted applications. These are the only ones allowed to run on your devices. Anything not on the list, blocked.
So it's like a VIP list, but for my computer.
Exactly. It's super effective against malware that tries to disguise itself as legitimate software.
Okay, that's smart. So it's like having a bouncer at the door of your computer.
Yeah.
No entry unless you're on the list.
Right. And it's especially good for those sneaky attacks where malware is disguised as like a fake app or something. There was actually one mentioned in here where malware called Cuckoo targeted Macs, and it was disguised as a Spotify converter.
Oh, wow. Talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing. Okay, allow listing, definitely adding that to my cybersecurity toolkit. Now, let's talk about this whole cryptojacking thing, because honestly, it just sounds expensive and not in a good way.
Yeah, it can be. It's basically when some sneaky malware hijacks your computer's processing power to mine cryptocurrency, and it's all for their profit, not yours.
Wait, so my computer starts running slower, my electricity bill goes through the roof, and some cybercriminal is like on a beach somewhere sipping cocktails?
Pretty much. And the worst part is it often happens in the background. You might not even realize what's going on.
So how do we even know if it's happening?
Well, a good anti-malware program can usually detect it. But honestly, prevention is key here. Being cautious about the websites you visit, the links you click, that's your best defense.
Okay, so be careful out there. Got it. We talked about strong passwords, but what about multi-factor authentication? I'll be honest, sometimes it feels like a bit of a hassle.
Oh, I hear you. It's that extra step, But trust me, it's one of the most effective security measures out there.
They sell it to me, convince me.
Think of it like this. You have one lock on your door, right? That's good. But what if you had a second lock?
2 locks are better than 1.
Exactly. It makes it that much harder for someone to break in. That's essentially what multi-factor authentication does. It's like that second lock for your digital life.
Okay, 2 locks are good. I get it. But how does that actually work in, the digital world?
So let's say someone gets a hold of your password, right? With multi-factor authentication, they still need something else to actually get into your account, like a code from an app on your phone, for example.
Ah, so it's like a digital deadbolt. They might get through the first layer of security, but then they hit a wall.
Precisely. And remember how we talked about administrative accounts and how important they are to protect? The Cyber Essentials requirements, they really hammer home the need for multi-factor authentication, especially for those accounts.
Makes sense. And if we loop back to our discussion about supply chain security for a second, wouldn't it make sense to require multi-factor authentication for any third-party accounts that can access an organization's systems?
100%. It all ties back to that principle of least privilege. limiting access, enforcing strong authentication. It's all about creating layers of defense.
Okay, I like that. Layers of defense. So even if one layer fails, the others are still there. It's like a safety net.
Exactly. You're thinking like a cybersecurity pro now.
Well, I'm learning from the best. One thing that really stood out to me in all of these documents is the emphasis on documented procedures. It's like having a plan is just as important as the tech itself, wouldn't you say?
100%. You can have the most amazing security tools in the world, but if you don't have clear procedures in place, those tools aren't going to be as effective.
It's like having a fire extinguisher, but not knowing where it is or how to use it.
Exactly. And these cyber essentials requirements, they're very specific about this. Things like password management, account creation, incident response. There needs to be a documented procedure for all of it.
Give me an example.
Sure, like changing passwords. There needs to be a written process for that, especially for really critical systems like firewalls. Same thing for managing user accounts. You need a documented process for approving new accounts and, crucially, for removing accounts when someone leaves the organization.
Right, because a forgotten account is basically an open invitation for cyber criminals.
Exactly. And it's not enough to just have these procedures written down somewhere. You have to review them regularly, make sure they're up to date and relevant.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's an ongoing process.
Cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. You've got to constantly adapt and evolve.
Love that. So we've talked about cyber essentials, malware, supply chain security, even the power of good old-fashioned documentation. It's a lot.
It is a lot, but it's all connected.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, any final words of wisdom for our listeners, before we release them back into the digital wild? So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, any final words of wisdom for our listeners, before we release them back into the digital wild?
One thing that really stood out to me going through all of these documents is the idea of shared responsibility.
Shared responsibility.
Yeah, like Cyber Essentials is great. It's a great framework, but it's not just on, the IT people, the cybersecurity experts to implement it.
Right, it takes a village.
Exactly. Everyone has a role to play. The individual users, they need to be careful about phishing emails, and organizational leaders, they need to make cybersecurity a top priority.
It's like that saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And in the digital world, there are a lot of potential weak links.
Absolutely. It could be anyone, someone using an old laptop, a supplier with, not so great security, or even like a CEO clicking on a bad link. We all need to work together, share what we know, and help each other stay safe.
So true. This deep dive has been, honestly, a real eye-opener. Staying safe in the digital world, it takes work.
It does. It takes vigilance, education. You got to be ready to adapt. But the good news is there are resources out there. Cyber Essentials, it's a great place to start.
Totally. So for our listeners out there, I want you to ask yourselves, am I doing everything I can to protect myself online? Am I following the Cyber Essentials principles? Am I being careful about the links I click, the information I share? Every little bit helps.
It all adds up.
It really does. Okay, so on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. This has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, stay safe out there in the digital world. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.